So there's a few brand new smartphones that are getting a lot of attention and a lot of hype, and this is not one of them, but maybe it should be. This is the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, and this smartphone is a smartphone that is for the budget-minded people out there who are looking for a good smartphone for around $200. So is this smartphone worth buying, and how does it stack up against other budget and mid-range phones? Well, let's find out in this video. Let's talk about the Galaxy A14 5G. So the A14 5G, I know it's not the Galaxy S23 or the S23 Ultra. It's not one of those phones, right? So I know it's not getting the attention that maybe it deserves, but I was very surprised to see this phone recently released in the US, and they did release an unlocked version for a very good price, right around $200. So we have to remember at $199.99, that is the retail price. Our expectations should be pretty low, and Samsung, honestly, they did a pretty good job with this phone. This phone does have a 2408 by 1080 resolution. It's a very gorgeous 6.6-inch screen. It's got a 5000 milliamp battery. It does have a 90 hertz screen. It does have a micro SD card slot. So I do think this phone does present a good value. We just have to remember that there are going to be some compromises in budget phones like this. For one, if you look at the design itself, sure, you have the headphone jack again, which is a bonus. You have a speaker here and you have a USB-C port here, but you are going to notice a plastic back. It honestly feels very unique. It has a unique texture, but it is going to feel a little cheaper than having a nice glass back on your phone, for example. It's not a gorgeous, amazing aluminum. You are going to have to deal with some plastic on this phone, and that's okay to me. Now, this speaker at the bottom, it is a mono speaker, so there is only one speaker that is working on this phone. You're not going to get a speaker on the top and the bottom. That's just how it is. Also, this does have a fingerprint sensor in the power button. Depending on who you are, that may be a good thing or a bad thing. Some people love fingerprint sensors in the power button, and some people prefer in-screen fingerprint sensors, but I am glad that they at least have a fingerprint sensor at this price, and it does work pretty well. It is a little bit slower, I would say, than some faster phones out there, but of course, that's exactly what I would expect for $200. But at least it is responding. When I put my finger on it, it is waking up pretty fast. So overall, I do like the fingerprint sensor. You do have a little teardrop notch here for the camera, which isn't a big deal for the front-facing camera. I think that is just fine. And on the back of the phone, you do have a similar look to the new Galaxy phones. You do have 3 different cameras here, and of course you have your flash. And it's on the left side that you see your micro SD card slot. So overall, I do think the design is very good for the money. I don't think it's unreasonable. I don't think they're really withholding a lot of things. I'm just pretty impressed overall that they could fit all of this in for such a good price. And I'm glad that budget phones still have things like SD card slots and headphone jacks. Those things are very good to see here. Now, when we take a look at the display, you are going to see that this display, again, it does have a pretty good resolution for this price. It's not an AMOLED screen. I know Samsung has put a lot of AMOLED screens in lower end phones. This does not have an AMOLED screen, but it does still have a nice LCD screen with a 90 hertz refresh rate. So overall, I'm pretty impressed by the resolution. I think things look good. They don't look completely dull. Again, if you are used to $300, $400, $500 phones, of course you're going to think this screen doesn't look good. If you're used to OLED screens, this screen will seem a little bit dull to you. But if you're used to phones around $100 or $200, this is a very good screen for the money, and Samsung is giving you a good value. I think videos do look very good when I'm watching them. I don't have any issues with those. I just wish that the speaker was a little bit louder. I wish they put a speaker towards the top of the phone. That is one thing that they're missing. Now, when we look at performance, the base model does come with 4 gigabytes of RAM. This phone does have a MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor, and that processor does actually very well as far as performance tests. It's actually very comparable to the Snapdragon 720G. So this processor will actually perform in a very similar way to something like the Google Pixel 4a. And that actually has pretty good performance, and it's actually better better than most phones at this price point. Now, depending on your market, you may have an Exynos model, the Exynos 1330, but overall, I'm still pretty impressed with the performance of the model that I have. I do feel like it is very competitive at that $200 price point, and this phone just feels very smooth when I'm using it in day-to-day tasks. If I'm opening up Google News, for example, if I'm opening up Amazon, if I'm scrolling around things like ESPN, or just scrolling around in general as I'm using the phone is actually pretty responsive. I don't have a lot of hiccups. You're mainly going to see hiccups if you are opening up multiple things at a time. This phone may need to reload applications depending on what you're doing, so those are just some things you need to keep in mind. If you're expecting a phone to have the performance of something like a $300 or $400 or $500 phone, if you're comparing this to a phone that's on sale, or if you're comparing this to a used flagship phone, of course this phone will be slower than those phones. But if you do compare this to other phones around $150, $200, $250, this phone, at least in the US, is actually a very competitive phone. A lot of phone reviewers, when they use a phone at $200, oh my gosh, everything is so slow, it's so sluggish. Of course it is, because they're used to using things like the Galaxy Fold. They're used to using $1,000 phones. They end up reviewing a phone like this, and they review it from the perspective of someone who always uses $1,000 phones. So everything is slow, everything is sluggish. Oh my gosh, this is the slowest phone on the planet. Well, of course it's slow to you because you're used to something like the Galaxy Fold. You're used to something like the Galaxy S22 or the S23. And a lot of tech reviewers are even bothered that they even have to pick a phone up like this in the first place, because they don't relate at all to normal average people who can't afford $1,000 phones. And that's just how it is, if I'm honest. So that's why it's really hard for a lot of tech reviewers to put themselves in that space, and it's hard for audience members who are watching these videos to really understand what they're watching, because a lot of people are misleading them when there are a lot of people out there who are used to budget phones. They are used to the speed of those budget phones, and this phone will be pretty fast to a lot of those people. If you look at the performance for the money, this phone is actually pretty fast when you consider that $200 price point. Samsung has been known to compete hard at a lot of these budget price points, and they also do great with software support at those price points as well. Now, if you do look beyond the performance, if you look at something like gaming, this phone does pretty decent with gaming, but gaming will not be a strong suit of this phone. You're not going to be able to max out the settings and game on the highest settings, and you're also not going to have to play at the absolutely lowest settings either. Of course, there are some games that are super demanding, and you might have to turn the settings all the way down. But for a lot of games, you're going to be able to play at those medium settings, and it should do okay. But some more demanding titles will push this phone, and that is something to keep in mind. This phone is not meant to be some processing beast that plays everything at the highest settings. This won't have a 120 Hz screen, but I will say I am pretty impressed that this does have a 90 Hz screen, because there's some phones at $300 or even $400 that do not have that. And this does feel very smooth when I am scrolling around and using this phone on a daily basis. Now, if we look at other things like extra features, do not expect a lot. This phone is not water resistant. This phone will not work with wireless charging, and this phone is not going to have super fast charging. It won't even have 25 watt or 35 watt. It has 15 watt fast charging, which honestly is not that fast. Now, another thing I want to talk about is the camera. How good is the camera on this phone? Well, you're not going to get 4K video footage. That's one thing you need to know. And if you are taking photos out there of various things, various objects, I take pictures of my cat, for example, or my daughters. I do like to take pictures of them as well. Overall, this phone does a decent job. Now, if you're looking to get the best phone with the best camera for the money, if you just so happen to find something like the Google Pixel 6a on sale, that has a terrific camera, one of the best cameras you're ever going to find at $299. Because that phone normally retails around $500, it's been going on sale quite a bit. So sure, that's going to have a terrific camera. But even on sale, that phone is going to cost $100 more than this does at the full retail price. I've already seen this phone go on sale at Best Buy for like $175, and I've already seen a lot of good trade-in deals from Samsung, and Samsung also has a lot of good educational discounts. So I would expect more sales to come on this phone, and this phone especially through a lot of prepaid carriers. You might find it for free, you might find it for $100 or even $150. So this phone is going to be a very good value for a lot of you, and one of the things that I am so impressed with on this phone is number one, the battery life, because the battery life is sensational on this phone, and I'm so glad to see terrific battery life with a 5,000 milliamp battery and a processor that is very battery efficient. You also have a headphone jack, which is great to see, and another thing that I love is the fact that this actually has a proximity sensor. So Samsung has been really slacking off in a lot of previous budget phones, and they weren't putting an actual proximity sensor in their phones. If you don't know what that is, basically it's the thing that makes your screen go black during phone calls. So most of us, we don't have to press the power button to make our screen go black. Normally, if we make a phone call, we put the phone up to our face, the phone will normally go black on its own. And that's because there's a sensor at the top of the phone that normally recognizes that you have the phone up to your face. Well, Samsung has really slacked off with a lot of budget models, and they did rely on a lot of software, let's say. They were relying on the software to really tell whenever you put the phone up to your face, and some other sensors, but they were not doing a good job. So even a phone like the Galaxy S20 FE, that phone is a terrific phone, but it did not have a proximity sensor, and I was calling people on accident all the time and hanging up on people because the phone never knew when it was correctly up to my face, and it never knew when to go black. Well, this phone, finally, a lot of good budget phones from Samsung are starting to put proximity sensors back in. This does have a proximity sensor, so overall this phone is actually a pretty good package when you think about it. It has a good display, it has a 90 Hz refresh rate, the performance is actually very good for the money, it has the same processor that you find in something like, or similar performance I should say, to the processor you find in something like the Galaxy Tab S6 Lite. That tablet retails for like $350, so to see a similar processor in a $200 phone, that is very, very impressive to me. You also have decent pictures, not great, but at least it's not going to be absolutely awful for the money. Battery life is good, you have a lot of cool extra features, you have an SD card slot, so this phone is going to be a very good phone for those of you who are wanting a cheap phone to get by, if you're looking to go to a prepaid carrier and just get a nice phone that's going to serve you well, that's going to get a decent amount of software updates, this will definitely be it. It does release with Android 13, which is nice, so you will get the latest Android version. You are going to get more software support beyond that, and you're going to get a phone that might not be super fancy. It won't be the fanciest phone in the world. You are going to have a lot of plastic in the build of this phone, but it is still a good phone that a lot of you should consider if you are looking for a budget or even a mid-range phone, depending on what your definition really is. So thank you so much for watching this video. I would highly recommend this phone to some of you if you do find it for a good price, and if you are on a lower budget. So let me know if you have any questions, if you have any comparisons, maybe you are looking at other phones around that price. I would be happy to talk about those things with you in the comments. And also check the links in the description, because there have been a lot of good deals even shortly after the launch of this phone. And if you have anything else at all, hey, let me know. But beyond that, check out some other videos if you get a little bit of time, and I hope you have a terrific day and a terrific week.